women of color do not believe, and we are having a secular parenting talk with our host here. Well, my name is Clay, by the way, Ecclesia Clay Wesley. And today we have here Cheryl Abram, Tiffany Green, and Kavin Senapathy. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. I have a couple questions for you guys today, but if you would like to start off with introductions.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Cheryl Abram. I was up earlier, I'm the author of Fire and God. I have 4 children. 2 of my little ones my oldest 2 are out of the house. And my 2 little ones live with me. They're 11 and 12. And I'm happy to be here and talk to you about this today.
Hi, I will go next. I'm Kavin Senapathy. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a freelance science writer and journalist. I cover science, health, and parenting from an evidence-based and social justice-driven perspective. So I've been doing that for about 7 years now. And I've covered everything from the lack of diversity in human genomic databases to how natural parenting can dehumanize women. And I've written about Monsanto. Right now, I'm writing about what would happen if viruses were to disappear. That's for an assignment. I'm also a co-founder and contributing editor at the website scimoms.com. That's SCI as in science. My human kids are 8 and 10 years old, and I also have 2 non-human babies. I'm a total dog person, even though I am allergic to dogs. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, so I am hoping to get together with Tiffany Green next week, outdoors, of course. As for my connection with non-belief and secularism, I basically got into it right at birth. So much of my extended family are still Hindu, and many of my relatives went to Catholic school in India. So that's a whole other story. So that is me in a nutshell. Thanks. I think we were supposed to have moderation or questions. Otherwise, whenever it's my turn.
Oh, no, I was saying, was it one more person that was supposed to introduce themselves?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will start to roll in. I was making sure everybody got a chance to speak. So yeah, I have a couple questions for you guys. First question is, how has COVID-19 impacted your home? And how are you and your family adjusting to the new normal, quotations, new normal?
Well, for me, it's had an enormous impact. Number one, I'm home all the time. So where I used to go to work every day, I'm now working from home. So that's been very different. And my boys as well, when when COVID hit, they were home all the time, going through school and doing all that. So now we're all in the same place all the time, so that's really been, it's different. It's very, very different. I've had to learn how to just redo everything from, what happens when we wake up in the morning to when I make dinner, and, all of that stuff has changed. So COVID has had an enormous impact on our routine and the things that we prioritize, and very big impact. Mm-hmm.
Would you like to tackle that question as well?
It looks like Tiffany just joined, so maybe she would like to do the intro first, or otherwise I can go ahead. Oh, now she's on. I can go ahead with that question while we maybe figure out what's going on with that. So I also have the situation of being with my entire family all the time. So I joke that sometimes it gets so annoying being with the people you love. But I have to talk about privileged when it comes to how things have affected my family. We've been really fortunate in several ways. So both my spouse and I have been able to work from home. And I think it's good to, or worthwhile to talk openly about these things. And we haven't had a long-term hit to our finances. And I wouldn't say our kids have thrived in virtual school, because how much can you really thrive after this long in virtual school? But they've done pretty well. And they're at that age where they're able to manage most of their school schedule. So for me, there's actually been a lot of guilt that comes with that. And regarding adjusting to the new normal, it's hard not to feel that sense of sort of languishing, I guess. I'm in my late 30s, and I always had this idea that, you know, I had kids a few years ago. And so my late 30s would be like the years that I do things, and like maybe the best era of my life, who knows? But so yeah, there's that sense of languishing. And I think a lot of us with families with kids, everything we do comes down to risk versus benefits calculations, and that's going to look different for different people. And for us, since we have the option, we've ended up pretty risk averse in terms of the activities that we choose to do. And really, every morning I'm waking up like checking the news and looking at Pfizer and the FDA, like, come on, we are waiting, like, please give us these vaccines for the younger kids. So yeah, once my kids are vaccinated, I'm hoping that we can get back into a lot of the activities we've had to skip for this long, including my coming to be with all of you in Chicago. I was so disappointed about that, but yes.
Would you like to tackle that question as well, Miss Green?
Yeah, so as you can see, I was running a little bit late because of, childcare, which is always a challenge. In terms of trying to juggle the pandemic as a parent, and particularly as a secular parent, I think it's difficult because you know data, but you know what you don't know. And I think the challenge is that everybody is seeing science play out in real time. And even though I know that's how it works, like mistakes and bumps and lumps, it's really, really hard to try to use the data, your knowledge of data, and then not extrapolate it to your own set of circumstances. It's really, really difficult. So that is definitely one thing that's a challenge for me. And feeling like I'm playing Russian roulette. My children are in daycare and school, and I felt so much guilt about sending them out, that, you know, I was being a bad mother. I wasn't protecting them. You know, I was doing something wrong. So I don't think there are any easy decisions that one can make during a pandemic. The last thing I'll say is I definitely feel a sense of rage that things are like this. It didn't have to be this way. You know, I should be there this weekend too. But, you know, people haven't gotten vaccinated. And because of that, our children are at really high risk. And it seems just so unfair.
Great answer, ladies. I have another question for you all. What do you think secular parents, especially women of color, have to keep in mind more than anyone else?
So as a secular parent, for me, so one thing that I did, and one reason was because of COVID, is I started homeschooling my boys this year. So I recognized that in school, and I recognize this more once I started homeschooling them, is that the same way it was for me when I was growing up in church, there was a set of rules, okay, that in school they had to follow. And everything they did in school was around those rules. Like, for example, the first assignment I gave them in homeschool was a writing assignment. And the first question I got was, okay, Mom, how many sentences does it have to be? You know, and how many words, does it have to be? Which had me realize that I was going to have to break them out of a lot of habits that they picked up at school, as far as limiting their creativity and their ability to ask questions. And, so I was going to have to break them out of that. And I've been doing that, since homeschool. But the idea that I'm able to see things that I didn't see before as a secular parent has really opened me up to allowing them to be more of whoever they are, and whoever it is that they choose to be. So I'm still working full time, however, I feel like homeschooling them also is just making better humans, for the world.
Who's next? Well, would you guys rather me call on you, or is that like?
No, I can go. So I think the question was what secular parents have to keep in mind, right? Especially women of color. And the virtual schooling is, it's been a challenge to see them kind of miss so much of kind of what you expected for your kids as they go through, elementary school. And so there's almost like a bit of grief for that like life that you expected them to live. But for me also personally, during the pandemic and being with my family so much and seeing, so many people die and go through long-term health problems. I've always actually been, I think, uniquely terrified of death. And I know some people are like me. And even though I've tried not to exhibit this fear, because I don't want it to rub off on my kids, for one of my kids, it was pretty clear they had sort of inherited this fear. And it was clear to me even before the pandemic, but it comes up a lot now. So we're thinking about and talking about death and loss and seeing all the death and loss around us. I tell myself and my kids that, we have to remind ourselves to think about our values, and take reasonable precautions when it comes to COVID, that precautions that are right for our family, and still make the most of every day, because the time, we all know the time we have on earth while we're alive is precious. And so I think it makes me think more also about how hard it is that we aren't going to tell our kids comforting stories about what happens to people when they die. So what other forms of comfort can you bring about and sort of steep your family and yourself in? And then you just sort of have to be available for those conversations, or that's how it's been in my experience. So, it's a process. So yeah, I guess that's the bulk of what I have to say for now. But yes, death. It's hard not to be negative. I'm trying. I know we all are.
So for me, I think my children are pretty young, and the challenge is trying to get them to wear masks properly. I mean, adults don't wear their masks properly, and not giving into despair, I guess, is the best way to put it. The thing is that women of color, especially Black women, moms don't get to take a day off, right? The things that still happen in the classroom that I have to stay vigilant about. making sure that they're not being treated any differently because of the color of their skin, making sure that, making sure my kids' friends are treating them well and vice versa. I think that is the extra load that I carry as a woman of color who works in research, who works in science, to have that dual burden, I think is a lot. And to be a Black woman working in this space, to understand the deaths of COVID, related to COVID, and how they're disproportionately concentrated among Black people and other people of color. That weight is a lot for me personally. And I think those two things, parents of color, they, weighing that is a lot. And I think the good thing about being secular, however, is I know that everything is not under my control, but some things are. And the things that I can change, I focus on. So thinking about influencing people through public scholarship, influencing policymakers. I think as women of color, taking those concrete actions and knowing that that is going to have to be good enough day by day is kind of what keeps me going.
That's great. You ladies are super, super busy, and you guys have so many things to juggle. So kudos to just women in general, and kudos to you guys. I have another question. This next question is, how seriously do you take self-care, and why is time away from your family important?
Well, given the fact that now we're together like literally 24/7, right? Getting away and just doing things that I enjoy doing is of course, it's very, very important, not just for me, to refresh myself, but so I can be available to my family, because if I'm not healthy, then I'm not helping anybody, so actually prioritizing myself and making sure I get, the rest and, the relaxation and the renewing that I need is good for everybody, not just for me, but for everybody that I'm interacting with.
Tiffany, do you want to go?
Oh, so I'll go. Well, unsurprisingly, if you heard my opening address, I think everything is structural. And, this idea that, self-care has become so commodified. I know I'm an economist, right? But it's become so commodified. And believe you me, I get facials. I got one yesterday. I get massages. I do all of those things. And I hear my kids. So I'll let Kavin.
The life of a secular parent. Okay. Are you back? Okay.
Sorry, y'all. And anyway, what I was going to say is that, and we're back. I think something crashed. What I was going to say is that we need to think about creating structural supports for parents, period, rather than relying on just self-care. So I'm more interested in how we can create paid leave, how we can create sick leave, how we can build vacation and other sorts of benefits into our daily lives. How can jobs do that? How can the government do that? And so my thing is, while self-care is important, I think at the individual level, I don't think it's really resolving what is going on at the structural level, which is that mothers do not have enough support. And we are basically the frayed social safety net in the United States. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state of everything for mothers and women of color and Black women especially is something that's one thing I do as a parent during the pandemic is I follow what everything Tiffany Green does, and I've been interviewing her for some of my work because she's brilliant. So she's touched on kind of some of what I've been interested in my work during the pandemic when it comes to my perspective, the perspective that I bring to my work, and to my journalism. But when it comes to self-care and the question about why time away from your family is important, it does include time away from my family for me, but and this does sound a little bit like that commodified type of self-care, but it's also for me doing work on myself. And what that means to me, I don't think is part of that commodified kind of health self-care, although I do also like facials, and I've taught myself a few manicure techniques too. So there's that. But I also, I have to work out regularly because it's part of what I need to do to prevent flare-ups of my chronic pain. And then it's also my mental health. So I've written about this a few times, but I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which is an anxiety disorder that's characterized by obsessions or intrusive thoughts, and then behaviors that people do to try to assuage those thoughts. And it's a vicious cycle. But I went through quite a bit of cognitive behavioral therapy a few years ago to help me manage my OCD. And I eventually sort of graduated in that I was handling things, or have been handling things pretty well, in keeping the worst of OCD at bay. But and this is normal during stressful times, but in the last several months, I've been having sort of a resurgence of what's called intrusive thoughts, which are these disturbing and vivid thoughts of basically very bad things. And that can look different for different people with intrusive thoughts. But for me, the thoughts are like these very vivid visions of harm coming to my loved ones. So one big self-care thing I'm doing is starting therapy again next month to deal with these thoughts. And also, more broadly, to try to set some more personal mental health goals for me. I'll be 39 next month. So I don't know, I've been thinking of kicking it up a notch this last year of my 30s. And to what Tiffany said about everything being structural, I was telling a friend of mine who's also a counselor who also works specifically with women of color. I was telling her that I was feeling guilt for the privilege of being able to access mental health care when it's in such short supply. I was on a waiting list for like 4 months or so, but still now I have an appointment. And she said something helpful, and that a lot of us who are aware of our various privileges can forget. And that's that, there's not necessarily any guilt that is required in terms of being aware of your privilege, although for me, sometimes it causes feelings of guilt. But so I think for me, I have to remind myself constantly to take stock of, or we can take stock of our situations, be intellectually honest, and do our best to exercise our privileges as much as we can for the better on committees that we serve on in the PTO, or whatever we do in our everyday lives. And also, I guess I could add, I'm not going to lie, that being with my kids and my spouse, so it's all 4 of us humans plus 2 dogs, pretty much 24/7. So I have them right here. So I carry my earbuds around the house with me in my pocket because I do have sensory issues. And sometimes I'll be like, I'm not trying to hear your sounds right now. And I'll just put my earbuds in, and they know that I am not going to hear them when they are talking to me. So, yeah.
That sounds like an awesome way to be able to sometimes just detach and shut down and take self-care very seriously. So shout out to everybody doing self-care in whichever way is best for them. Before we move on to our Q&A section, I have a random wildcard question for you guys, and that's basically what advice or what is any tidbit of information that you would pass along to anybody in terms of secular parenting?
Well, the one thing that really stood out for me, and I even asked at the end of Firing God, I asked the question, I say, so what? All right, I've seen what I've seen. I realized that everything I believed, was wrong. So what? What now? And the so what of that is at least part of it, a very large part of it is I have been able to reclaim my accountability. I've been able to reclaim my responsibility and my ability to actually make choices versus depending on, rules that were written in a book to make those choices for me. Now, with that accountability, I now have to pay attention. Okay, if I'm going to be making these decisions and making these choices, I have to listen, I have to inquire, I have to ask a lot more questions than I ever asked before, about all kinds of things. And as a parent, that applies to my kids too, all right? So there's no, seen and not heard, that stuff does not happen, okay? I've learned and I'm relearning my children, and I see how valuable they are and how insightful they are when I really take the time to listen to them, and consider what they're saying, because it really does enrich all of our lives when I take the time to do that. So, one thing I would say is, with the reclaiming of accountability that we get when we lay down, the book that tells us how to live our lives, as a parent, just, be sure that we're paying attention.
Well, I agree with that 100%. I would say, the first advice that I got, the perfect advice that I got, that was general advice, is that feel free to ignore everybody's advice about parenting, which I try to take to heart as much as possible, because sometimes I feel like none of us know what we're doing.
Right.
But one of the things that I think is important, especially those of us who come from, really religious households, is to really break the chains of authoritarian parenting. Like, we don't question what it means to, like, oh, somebody has bad kids or that. Like, this is an autonomous human being. Yes, you're helping them grow. Yes, you're guiding them, but they are people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's more than, no, of course I don't spank my kids, but it's more than that. How do you talk to them? Are you into, well, children, as somebody else said, children are seen, not heard? Well, what does that mean? Where do you get that from? Mm-hmm. And so I think the important thing about secular parenting for me is the chance to look at parenting without that baggage. And let me be clear, some of the moms that run some of the conscious parenting groups are Christians. They're not judgy at all, which is great. But when you are not worried about adhering to some model of parenting that's authoritarian, that often has religious roots, but not completely, because society hates kids, you realize that you have a chance to do something different and something better. And I fail at it every day, but I get up and I keep trying again, because I want to raise free and happy and whole Black boys. And that, if I do that, then I feel like I'll have won.
So yeah, in terms of my piece of advice, I again found what you said interesting, Tiffany, in terms of breaking the chains of authoritative parenting, especially because I was brought up atheist, but I think it takes a couple of generations still for the authoritative parenting that comes from religion. Again, talking to my kids and figuring that out, is a process, and it's ongoing. Now, I'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow at my presentation at 2:00 about what we can do, what I kind of think about when I think of what it means to go beyond belief. And there's ways that I think I can do that in my community, or I can participate in doing this in my community. But there's also the aspect, being a secular woman of color with children, and kind of examining the influence that religion still has in my life and in the lives of my kids, even though I've never been religious. And just the nature of this pandemic has pushed me to spend a lot of time thinking and educating myself about this role of religion, especially since my kids are at an age where I want to start telling them the stories of their families and ancestors, for better and worse. So for instance, as I learn more about the history of British colonial India, I've realized that that my ancestors' relationship with religion has had both a marginalizing force, throughout the generations and in my life, but it has also granted me some of my privileges too. So the marginalization aspect of that is super complex, I guess, but it includes the attitudes of generations over time that were so shaped by religion. So that includes Hinduism and Christianity, not only because many of my ancestors and living relatives were actually educated at Christian schools in India, but also the British influence on how, on the trajectory of Hinduism. So a more concrete example of the unearned privileges that religion has granted me and my family is the role of the caste system, which was again highly influenced by British colonizers. But although my family's caste is not considered one of the upper castes, you'll often hear people of my family's caste say something like, "Oh, we are just simple farmers," to try to kind of downplay their privilege, which I think is BS. But my ancestors had two very important privileges that people of lower castes or so-called outcasts have not historically had. And by and large, they're still, of course, affected by these generational forces to this day. And those two things were access to education and the right to land ownership, which, of course, we know how land ownership and generational wealth affects disparities in the US. But I also believe that that my family's place in the US was entirely shaped by those privileges and the generational wealth that came with it. And it has also shaped the Indian American community in terms of the types of people and the types of privileges required to have immigrated to the US over the years. So I'm unpacking this right now. I have been for the last year or more, and sharing it with my children, and even sharing it with my parents, and asking them, what do you know about this? How were you what were you taught about our family story, and is that completely accurate? And I think it's worth doing because, again, you only have one life to kind of understand your place in the world and, why things are the way they are.
Thank you, ladies. Now we are in our Q&A section of this time. Is there anyone that has any questions for our speakers? Fancy.
So this question is for Cheryl. I was just curious about the homeschooling. My kid goes to school right now and they get tested like every Friday, but it's still a little crazy. And so I was just curious about how you feel about the social aspect that they may be missing, like when you made your decision.
Right. Well, my kids are like, they're not very sociable, you know, but, you know, with, we still do things. It's in the curriculum that we will, go out to different places and to the libraries and, various places where it's safe to do so. So the social aspect of it, and even when they were in school, they would do some things after school, but my boys are very, are such that that's not as much of a concern for me, so they really do, they get as much socializing as they can stand, so. Yeah, they're more like, I'm kind of like that too, where, yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel that it could.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of creating better, I like the idea of creating like
Better humans at home with
Yes.
the, deconstruct what they've been learning and then you build something that's right.
Right.
I like that. But then at the same time, I'm like, oh man, this kid's going to miss like the soccer field and that's all he comes home and that's all he talks about is recess,
Oh, wow.
which should be a problem. I think.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I was asking.
Yeah. So we get out last week. We had a lesson about the flat earth, talking about that perspective. So we went out and, just investigated and, walked around and, so we do, get out and get among people as part of the lesson, because, they're going to have to, do that in real life. And we try to do things that they're going to have to do in real life. Okay. In real life, you're going to have to interact. You're going to have to talk to people. You're going to have to, be polite, all that stuff. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
There is a question in the chat. Not sure if you saw it.
I guess I can read it out loud and then
Sure.
I'll speak to it and then the others can go. So Melanie asked, what do you guys say when the kids come home with religious questions after spending time with family? Do you say all the Bible stories are fables or that everyone's allowed to believe what they want? What grandma believes this, mommy believes this, etc. Or do you straight up tell them the stuff didn't happen? This includes the Bible, Quran, and any and all other religious texts. So I can't really speak to this because in Hinduism, at least when it comes to my family, they're not referring to a whole lot of texts. However, I can speak more to some of the regressive ideas in the South Asian community, the Indian community, or even the South Indian community for that matter, and the diaspora. So ideas of kind of what is befitting a woman and what, about morality and about behavior and how certain people should act. So yeah, I tell them that those things are straight up ideas that we don't agree with, and we talk about why we don't agree with these ideas. And we also talk about context, when it comes to decorum. It helps to understand the history of the decorum and why it is the way it is, and when it might be appropriate to not abide by it, and how to do that, and I guess make it worth it. For example, so my kids aren't in school right now; they're virtual, but my daughter, like pretty early, first grade, she told, like, it wasn't, I didn't say anything, but she told me that she had decided not to say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. And I said, oh, you don't say the whole thing? She's like, yeah, I just don't say it. And I guess like one of her classmates had made that decision. So maybe they did it together. And, I asked her which part bothered her. And I mentioned, the one nation under God part has bothered me in the past, and it does bother many people, and there have been court cases about it. And she's like, well, I think the whole thing bothers me. And then we just talked about, it is kind of creepy to pledge allegiance to anything, let alone an inanimate object like a flag. So I could ramble about this all day, but there we go.
Do we have any more questions from the chat or any more questions from the audience?
I do see a good question in the chat. It's from Kachina Davis. My child has been a non-believer since pretty early in life. He's now 10 and laments not knowing other kids who are non-believers. We live in the Bible Belt, and he was threatened by hellfire by other kids for not believing in a God as early as first grade. How do you foster a sense of community for young atheist, humanist skeptics? Man, that's a really good question. My kids are not quite old enough to have asked me those questions, which is weird because they ask about everything else. But here we are. That is a really good question, particularly raising children of color who often are less likely to be in atheist or humanist families. I think one thing that I hope to do when my kids get older is potentially send them to Camp Quest. So Camp Quest is a summer camp for atheists and skeptics kids. So, and I think that's a potentially good way to help kids get a sense of community. But I'm curious to see what other people are saying, because I've been struggling with that myself, particularly being in a place like, where the Black population is probably like 6%, maybe less in my suburb. So how I think about getting my sons there, in touch with their culture when a lot of it revolves around church. That's a really difficult thing, which was not your question, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, I tend to, the way that I look at it is, I'm still learning to trust myself, when it comes to, because I'm still a believer in some things. There are things I believe about what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a Black woman, what it means to be a professional. Belief hasn't gone anywhere. I still have them, but now I know I don't have to hold on to them. Okay. And I also know I don't have to believe. I can actually know if I, do some investigating. Well, let me find out exactly what's going on right here, so I don't have to take somebody else's word for it, Now, because, I am a human animal, and I am going to have to trust what some people tell me, without all kinds of evidence. And that's something I do. However, the question now for me is no longer, well, is this a right belief or is this a wrong belief? The question now, okay, is it useful? Is this belief useful for me, to do what it is, I feel like my purpose is, to do what it is I feel my job is, is it helping me to grow? Is it helping people around me to grow and do and trust themselves? And do you know what I mean? So the question about the belief has changed, because I do still have them. I am not a 100%, I believe in absolutely nothing type person. I am still human after all. But, and it's not just religion, that I had to eventually do that with. It had, with me as a woman. I've been told a lot of things about what a woman is, what a woman should do, how a woman should be, what the role, all that, Now, and I had to say, well, is that useful for me? Is that actually helping me to be more, to grow more into the possibilities that I know that I have? And some of those, they had to go by the wayside, because I know me. I know that belief about what a woman is supposed to be in this particular instance is not going to work for me. Okay, so I had to let that go. So with my kids, it's the same way. The lesson here is not what should you believe, what shouldn't you believe. The lesson is you need to trust yourself, okay? You know you. Nobody else knows you like you know you, all right? What you do need to know is that you have resources in order to be able to ask those questions, to ask the question, well, is this useful for me or is it not useful for me? And you have the ability and the authority, to fire a belief if you want to. Because there is no belief without the believer. It needs you to be there, So that's what I tell my kids.
Tiffany and I are both like, yes, when it comes to beliefs about a woman, what a woman should and shouldn't be. But to the question about how do you foster a sense of community for your young humanists and skeptics, especially during the pandemic, that's hard with my kids still not in school, although we try to do get-togethers outdoors with young kids. But to this theme of understanding and really grasping as a secular woman of color that any belief needs to be weighed in the same way that we might weigh belief in God. I think children, and my kids again are 8 and 10, they're watching us, and so they're kind of what we model for them sets them up for when they get older and they do build their own communities, they do build their chosen families, they do build their collaborators and co-conspirators. And so, before the pandemic, we would spend a lot of time with friends, adults with kids, adults without kids, and again, back to that idea that that old idea that children are not to be heard. We don't treat them like tiny adults, but we also let them observe the conversation. So if we're talking about our bodies or birth or the issues that we have to vote on coming up, and we're weighing these beliefs in the same way that we might have weighed belief in deities, I think this helps them kind of understand the kind of relationships and interpersonal work that people do to kind of become the most authentic version of themselves. Not to sound wooey or anything, but yeah, like that community building journey or process. There's the immediate, like how to kind of help your children cultivate their group of people now, but also help your children kind of learn your values, but also your way of thinking and your critical thinking as it comes to building and being part of a community.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for such very insightful responses. We are now in our conclusion. So if you could start off the sentence, in conclusion, when it comes to secular parenting, blank. So I would love to see how you ladies are going to fill in that blank. So when it comes to secular parenting, in conclusion, when it comes to secular parenting, blank.
Well, in conclusion, when it comes to secular parenting, I am glad that I'm here to actually talk about this. All right. I don't know. I'm glad that I was really able to see beyond my fear and, start to become a real person.
So what was it when it comes to secular parenting blank, right?
In conclusion, when it comes to secular parenting.
Okay. Well, I would say in conclusion, when it comes to secular parenting, like for me, it comes down to patience. So having patience with myself, with my community, you know, especially as a secular woman of color and parent of color, I want to have compassion for my fellow parents of color, and you know, kind of really build each other up. So I guess that blank was a very long. So, but in conclusion, when it comes to secular parenting, have patience for yourself, for your kids, for others, and also earbuds.
Well, other than keep the door closed, in conclusion, secular parenting is about the same way that you question your ideas about faith and about religion. You should do that about parenting, and take the same critical eye to parenting and be compassionate with yourself. I think that would be my advice for secular parents of color. And also protect yourself and your boundaries, because they will get eroded. And I think for women of color, get eroded even more quickly. And it's important to maintain those boundaries.
Thank you, ladies, today for such insight.